My name is Dan Fenn. This is the latest edition of Lexington Remembers and our special series on World War II veterans of Lexington. And it's my pleasure to have as our guest today John Yanakis. Lives over near the high school, has lived there for over 60 years. He's kind of young. He's actually only 95 compared to some of us. He was willing to tell his story of his service during World War II. And John, when did your service begin?
It began right after I graduated from high school. They deferred me for 6 months so I could graduate. And then I went to the induction center, went through the usual, and then they asked me, do I want Army or Navy? And I said, I'd like the Army.
So they gave you a choice.
They gave me a choice. I said Army, and then they stamped it and said Navy.
Of course, yes, that's the military.
They sent us where they needed us.
Yeah, right. So had you enlisted or were you drafted?
I was drafted.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to graduate from high school first, and I had 6 months to go.
Yeah. I'm sort of surprised that then they gave you a choice. You were
I think
lucky.
that was, they were being funny about it, I think.
I see, okay. So they enrolled you in the Navy, and when was this?
It was 1942. I think it was May 1942. Or June 1942, because I graduated in June.
And so where did this induction and swearing in take place?
It was in New York City.
Oh.
Well, that's where I was drafted. Then they asked me to get on a bus, and then I got shipped to Camp Perry, Virginia, for basic training.
Oh, yes.
And it turned out it was, 30 days of basic training.
And what did you do in basic training?
Well, they marched us, and they got us used to, making us fit.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, if I can remember, after basic training was over, got assigned to the construction battalion, which had nothing to do with the Navy. I didn't think.
Yeah.
And what it was is they called it Naval Construction Battalion. And it was
Why?
Because they were building things.
Yeah, I see. And it wasn't that you had any particular experience.
No, I was hall guy. Haul this from here to there.
Ah, yes, okay.
So we went to Gulfport, Mississippi, preparing to ship out. And
how soon?
Well,
You had a month of basic training?
more basic training.
Yeah.
And we would just wait and see where they wanted to put us to. And I forgot how long I was there, but we got shipped out on January 1st of 1943.
43. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we didn't know where we were going. And we ended up going through the Caribbean, across the equator.
Liberty ship?
Yeah, nothing but Liberty ships then.
Yeah.
There were no airplane flights for troops. It was all troop ships.
Right.
And
Five bunks.
Five.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then we went through the Panama Canal.
Were you in convoy?
Was I what?
In convoy with
Not yet.
destroyers and stuff?
Not yet.
Uh-huh.
When we got to the Pacific, we were joined by 2 destroyers to escort us because you couldn't use radio, so they used signals.
Yeah.
And we were going south. We past Galapagos Islands, and all of a sudden we got hit by a typhoon. Typhoon was immense. We were tossed from side to side, the ship. If you were on the fifth tier, you couldn't stay there, but you pushed over. They locked us up in the hold. We couldn't come out. It was a rough night. Half of us were on our knees praying. And
Anybody seasick?
are you kidding?
Those 50-gallon drums, yeah.
And then suddenly the ship tilted over so much, a wave went into the smokestack and killed the engines.
No kidding.
And the name of the ship was Azalea City. And then we were sitting ducks. We got up the next morning and they let us out. The sea was like glass, but no destroyers around. Well, they must have left because they didn't want it. Either that or they sank, I don't know. And for 2 days, there was nothing to eat because everything in the kitchen ended up in the ceiling.
Oh, my Lord.
And so we just stayed there, and we were washing our whites in the seawater
Yeah.
to get them nice
Yeah.
and white.
Yeah.
Anyway, we survived that. And
What happened? There you are floating without
That-
destroyers and no engine.
by that nightfall, they got the engines running.
I see, okay.
And then we started on our own, but we didn't have any escorts. So they had to zigzag.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't know where we were going, but we ended up in the New Hebrides Islands.
Uh-huh,
That's South Pacific,
yeah,
north of New Zealand, I think, somewhere.
yeah.
And there we got more basic training.
So how come they didn't tell you where the...
Oh, they never tell you anything because they don't want
Well, that's true,
a,
but...
a slip of the lip sinks
Yeah,
the
I
ship.
remember.
So everything was super secret.
But we knew we were going to Italy when we set off from Hampton Roads. Okay, so New Hebrides, what kind of a post was that?
Well, it was I guess a gathering post. We didn't stay there long. We were preparing to ship us to the next island that had to be rebuilt.
Yeah.
So while we were there, they lined us up like they always do, and they said, we're going to read off these names, and you're going to have KP for the next 90 days.
90
90
days of KP?
And I relaxed because I began with a Y.
Yeah.
It didn't work.
Yeah?
He says, I'm starting off with the Z's.
Oh. So 90 days straight?
90 days. One advantage is they gave us $5 pay increase per month.
Oh, that's good.
But it was good because most of our 90 days was being transported. And when we were on the transport ship, they didn't want everybody to not do anything, so they assigned other people to do the
Oh, well, that's good. Yeah.
And the rest of us played poker, or I wasn't much of a poker player. But I watched a poker game on the ship, and it was the first time, probably the last time I ever saw it. Guys on both sides, and raise. Everybody was raising, and said, "You're crazy." They ended up 3 aces versus 3 kings.
No.
What chance is that of happening?
Exactly. No wonder they were raising.
Anyway, we ended up in the Admiralty Islands, and that's where I was for most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where I was loading a 10-foot truck with other guys with 20-foot pipe. And it had to be just right, otherwise it would tilt over. And I was on the truck, and one pipe didn't go enough. So I raised it up, and I said, push it back. And they pushed it back, smashed my finger.
Oh, for Pete's sake.
And then I couldn't do anything. So I went to the medic, and they kept putting iodine on it. By the third day, it was throbbing and black and blue. So when I went to the medic, I said, I got to see a doctor. And the doctor took one look at it. He said, where the hell have you been? You let this go, it'll be gangrene.
Oh, wonderful. And
So-
you didn't even get a Purple Heart.
Never mind, he saved my finger.
Yeah.
He put me in what they called then the operating room,
Yeah.
and laid me on a table. And he says, I'm going to numb this, and then I'm going to have to pull a nail out. So I was the big hero. I was going to look at it. He said, I suggest you look the other way. And he did that. So I was 2 weeks with my arm in a bandage and a sling, and the commander said, hey, we can't have this guy doing nothing for 2 weeks. So they said, what do you do? What'd you do in school? I said, I learned to type. Oh, you type? I said, yeah. He says, well, we could use you. I said, well, he says, type with one finger. I said, yeah. So they put me in the personnel office of the battalion, and I was there throughout the whole, not in the same position, because I later got transferred to the 110th Naval Brigade, which was in charge of several battalions.
Uh-huh.
And so I was in the personnel office most of the time. And our guys were building airfields, onset huts, medical buildings, in preparation for the next island, because we were going from island to island. And when we were through there, while I was at the Admiralty Islands, I happened to run into a cousin who was on a naval ship, and we were corresponding with each other by V-mail.
Oh, yes.
And usually it took 30 days. And one day I opened up the letter, and I noticed the date was the same date I was reading the letter. And I said, oh, wait a minute, he must be on our island somewhere, or in the bay. And sure enough, he was. And we met there, first cousins, in the middle of nowhere. And anyway, we left the Admiralty Islands, and they were shipping us from one island to the next. We didn't know where we were going.
Yeah.
And finally, we heard toward the end of our trip, we were heading for Okinawa. So we said, we're going to land in Okinawa. Good. Because we wanted to be heroes.
Yeah.
We got to Okinawa, we got off the troop ship, and then Marines were lined up on a beach cooking steaks and said, how do you like your steak?
How do you like which?
Your steak.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And while we were in Okinawa, again, we built tents for everybody, Quonset huts, you name it. We were there till they bombed Hiroshima.
Uh-huh.
And then we said, well, that should end the war. And we waited when nothing happened. Then he dropped the second bomb on Nagasaki,
Yeah.
which I think could have been held up. It wasn't necessary. The first one was damaging enough. And then the war was over. And then we were anxious to get back home.
Oh, boy, we were anxious to get back home the
We
whole
were
war.
We were 2 years overseas. In the meantime, they had sent us to New Caledonia for rest and recreation. Not back home, New Caledonia.
Yeah, what was that like?
That was very pleasant. It was under French control, and it was we weren't there long. But I had developed jungle rot.
Oh.
And while I was over
what
there,
was that?
Again, it was just a skin problem, and they couldn't cure it. When I got there, they put some kind of purple solution on it and dried it up right away.
Really?
I had it for a month. Nobody could do anything with it.
Yeah,
I forgot what the purple solution was, but
yeah.
I remember
Yeah.
there was a name for it.
What kind of quarters did you have? Were they tents where you're living in?
What was that again?
What kind of quarters did you have? Were
We-
you living in tents or barracks?
We were living in tents,
Yeah.
which we built,
Yeah,
but our tents had wooden floors
yeah,
because we were Seabees, so we made everything.
yeah, yeah,
And there were 4 bunks to a tent.
yeah, yeah.
And
And what was the temperature? Was it hot?
it was hot, and a lot of mosquitoes. So every bunk had netting over it.
Yeah, yeah,
And they said using nets so you don't get bit by mosquitoes, even though they gave us quinine tablets.
yeah,
But I got tired of putting the net on. I slept one night without the net, and I woke up and I felt something nibbling on my toe, and I wiggled it. It was a rat.
No.
And sometimes I wiggled my toe and moved my leg, it crawled up right past me because palm trees were full of rats.
Yeah,
And that was the last time I didn't put a net up.
yeah, I'll bet. So what did you do? So you work in the personnel office from 8 to 4 or whatever. Then what did you do?
Well, I got when we hit the United States, back to the
Yeah.
United States, then they gave us,
No, but I mean at the end of the day, well, what did you do out there?
we were working. There was a lot of paperwork to be done.
Yeah. But it was pretty much an 8-hour day, wasn't
What?
it? Was it an 8-hour day?
Oh, yeah,
And then what did you do in the evening?
the usual. There wasn't much to do. There were no lights, of course,
Yeah.
so we went to bed early.
Uh-huh. And there was no community, no city, nothing
was-
nearby you
There
could
was
go
nothing.
to.
There was nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing there. None of the islands had anything.
Yeah,
It was just islands in the middle of the Pacific
yeah.
with nothing there.
Did you interact with the native people?
No, they were mostly gone.
Yeah. Nobody there but GIs.
Nothing but GIs.
Yeah.
And any natives that there were natives, and they were all dressed in muumuu dresses.
Yeah.
And when I got to New Caledonia, finally there was women that dressed fashionably.
Yeah. Yeah.
That got my
Yeah.
surprise. But and then the war ended, and we were waiting to be sent home, and naturally in a hurry. And being in the personnel office, guys would come in and ask the commander, when are we going home?
Yeah.
And he'd give them a different answer every time.
Of course.
So I said, my buddy and I in the office said, this isn't right. So I went to the mess hall and told the guys what was going on. I said, what can we do? I said, starting tomorrow at 9 o'clock, everybody go in and every half hour and ask the same question.
Yeah. And they still didn't get a straight answer.
After the third guy walked in, the commander blew his stack. Who the hell is at the bottom of this? We're going to get court-martialed. I guess I was mutinous.
I guess so. I guess so.
But immediately he got on the phone and got a correct answer.
Oh, he got a real answer.
Yeah, he called the Admiralty and got an answer, and then he told us.
Yeah.
But if we did nothing, nothing would have happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So when did you head for home?
Sometime in I think it was around May 1942, May or June 1942.
42. No, the war was...
Oh, 45, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And we pulled into Long Beach, California, and right away there were 3 of us buddies. We headed for the train station and for travel agent, we wanted to get a train ride, Pullman, to ship us to New York. And right away, because we only had 30 days. Then it takes a week to go to New York, and a week to come back. There goes our...
So they gave you a 30-day leave, but they didn't discharge you.
No, 30-day leave. I was still in the service.
But why didn't they discharge you when the war was over?
No, they had, whatever their reasons were, they didn't discharge us.
So when you hit California, then you got a 30-day leave. And it took you a week to cross the country.
Yeah, 4 days, 4 to 5 days. And
But not on a troop train.
oh, no, it was at our expense.
Oh?
Yeah, we had to pay the train to take us over. And this is the funny part. When we went to the travel agency, we said, well, we need a Pullman for 3 guys to leave as early as possible. And the guy said, well, we only have 2 bunks, an upper and a lower. So I said, there's 3 of us, we want to go together. He said, well, 2 of us will take the lower bunk because it's bigger. And the person at the travel, so he says, oh, the Navy doesn't allow 2 people on the lower bunk. So I looked at him and I said, what's the Navy got to do with it? I'm paying for the trip.
Yeah, yeah.
They checked and we won.
Ah, good, okay.
And we got to New York eventually and spent our 30 days. While in New York, we reported back to a base in New York City, and they assigned us again, me anyway, to Norfolk, Virginia. And I was there for, I don't know how long. And I got discharged from Norfolk, Virginia.
When?
I guess it was June 45.
Really? And where in New York were you living?
I was living in Manhattan with my parents.
I see. Okay. And what did your family do? What did your father do?
My father was running a small linen supply business to restaurants.
I see.
In those days, everybody in a restaurant wore white.
Yeah.
Crisp white.
Yeah, yeah. So how did you end up in Lexington?
I married a girl from Dorchester.
Uh-huh.
And we lived in New York for a while.
Uh-huh.
And then her father died. And she wanted to come home to support her mother and her sister. So I moved up here, and we stayed up here since then.
And you moved right to Lexington from New York?
No, to Belmont first.
I see.
I was there in Belmont for about 4 years, and then told my mother-in-law I wanted my own house, and we started looking in Lexington, and that's where we found one.
Yeah, yeah. And what were you doing professionally then?
I was working as an auditor for Marshall's.
Uh-huh.
I was audit manager for the field auditors. And when Marshall started out, they only had about 19 stores when I was there.
Yeah.
By the time we left, we had 300. And that was a lot of, I couldn't do all of the audits myself. I ended up with 11 others in various parts of the country that I had.
But how'd you get into the auditing business? You weren't doing that during the war.
No, but when I went to college after the war, I went to Long Island University, and I studied accounting.
I see. Okay. And you've been, when did you retire?
I'm trying to, 1994. I retired in 1994 from Marshall.
Yeah.
And then I had to do other things. I couldn't just sit around. And there was an ad in the senior center in Lexington. Somebody was looking for drivers, and I applied. And it was a dental lab that prepared dentures for dentists.
Oh, yeah.
And so I applied, they accepted me, and I was driving all over Greater Boston, delivering teeth from the lab to the dentist office.
Yeah.
And I learned how to get around Greater Boston with
Yeah.
my car.
Could have been an Uber driver.
Yeah. And then after, at the same time, I was also a tax aide for Lexington seniors.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, at that time.
Wonderful
I don't do it anymore.
service. You don't?
No, because everything's on computer now, and I'm not computer oriented.
I see. Okay. So you did that up at the senior center for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, now I have somebody else do my taxes for me because I can't keep up with it.
Yeah.
And the person I have is the person who was teaching us in Lexington how to do it.
Oh, really? Oh, that's good. That's good. You know, you're 95. I'm going to be 97 next month. Well, what do you do to keep yourself perky and alive and doing stuff?
Well, I have associates with our church. I'm a member of the St. Nicholas Church in Lexington.
Oh, sure. Been there for a long time.
Yeah. And we started it. Now the younger generation is taking over. But we have communications with the parishioners.
Mm-hmm. So what do you got by way of family? Family.
What about them?
What do you have?
I have, well, I had two other cousins, well, several cousins, but two other cousins who were the same name as me, and one ended up in the Army. Both of them ended up in the Army. One ended up in India, and the other one ended up in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
And the one in the Philippines eventually became my best man when we got married.
Ah.
But we all had the same first name, and at one time, two of us were going to the same school, public school. And
That must have been confusing.
it was, and that's when the teacher said, "Wait a minute, this thing can get. What's your middle name?" We didn't have a middle name, so they said, "What's your father's name?" We said, "Okay, you have your father's first name initial." And my father's name was Constantine. The other one was Peter, and the other one was James. So we.
So that worked.
That worked.
Yeah. But you're living in the same house
I lived in the same house since I moved into Lexington.
Yeah.
As a youth, I moved so many times. When I got to Lexington, I said, "I'm not moving out of here."
Yeah, right.
And I guess it meant it.
Yeah. I feel the same way. I'm settled. I'm not going to go through a move.
That's right. Just the thought of it is mind-boggling.
I know. I sure appreciate your coming in. Is there anything else that you think that we should touch on?
I don't know if I mentioned the typhoon in Okinawa that hit.
Oh, another one.
Oh yeah, it took planes and splintered them like toothpicks.
No kidding.
Yeah, I got pictures of them, and
Yeah.
it was so strong it blew the roofs off the Quonset huts.
Really? That must have been scary.
It was, especially if you're living in tents.
Yeah, right. Right.
So
And-
I started with a typhoon. I ended up with a typhoon.
Yeah. And the weather was pretty constant, hot all the
It
time.
was always hot and humid.
Yeah,
The islands are that way.
yeah. Not a place to go on vacation.
Although I would have loved to have gone back because the sunsets out there were absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh,
You never did go back, though.
no.
No. Yeah.
I get the same thing at the Caribbean, just as comfortable.
Yeah. And you didn't join the reserves. You'd had enough.
I didn't join the reserves. No, I didn't
either.
want anything to do with it.
Yeah, right, right. Enough is enough. Were you in touch with the guys that you served with?
I wasn't, as a matter of fact, I was for a while, because we were a small unit, 110th Brigade,
Yeah.
and once a year I managed to get together in New York City,
Uh-huh.
just for dinner and dancing. And we did it at Tavern on the Green in New York City.
Ah, nice.
And I had pictures of those, and there was one of them, his name was John Schmidt, and he lived in New York City. He then got married, moved to Bergen County, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the only one I invited to my wedding. But after the wedding, I never saw him again. We lost contact.
Yeah.
And I don't know now if he's still living or what.
Yeah, right.
There's a Schmidt on television. I think he works for the New York Times. And just looking at his eyes remind me very much of this person. I was wondering if they were any way related.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, you do lose touch after a while. Well, listen, great to see you. Thanks ever so much for doing this.
No problem. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Good.
And it's
a long time ago.
It sure is. It sure is. I remember half the things and
Yeah, right.
forget the other half.
That happens to us,
But
too.
it had nothing to do with battles or anything like that.
Yeah, right. Thank you, John, and thank you for watching. We'll be along with a new edition shortly.